Hey guys, welcome back, and I'm here today to do a in-depth care guide for one of my favorite reptiles. Stay tuned. So on one of the recent shorts I did, I got feedback from somebody that said they'd like to see me do an in-depth care guide for Tokay geckos. I believe it was the one where we showed the Tokay Gecko eggs, and the person explained that there's not many out there. So I said, okay, let's do it. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna go over care for Tokay geckos and breeding as well, and how to care for the eggs afterwards. Tokay geckos, as long as I can remember, are one of my favorite looking reptiles, and they were like something out of this world. So that was the main reason I wanted to get them. And then I learned from Reptiles that they were a parental reptile, and it made me that much more interested in them. So I got a pair of them from Tokay Gecko I'd say about a year and a half ago, and they weren't babies at the time, so they are up to age now. As we've shown recently, they have laid eggs. We're waiting on those eggs to hatch. So they are mature now. These animals are nocturnal carnivorous, and they are arboreal. So they come out at night typically. They like to be high up in the canopies, and they eat only meat or insects. So a few things to know before we get into this. They are native to Southeast Asia. They very tropical climates. They are now invasive in Florida, Martinique, and Belize. They prefer tropical habitats, but you can find them inside of homes a lot when they're hunting and chasing after bugs. Going back to them being an arboreal species, when I say they are arboreal, I have never seen my pair on the ground at all. So that's something to think about, and when you're providing hides and how you're going to decorate your cage, but we'll get into that later. They are the second largest gecko on Earth, with the Leachianus being the largest. So these guys can get from 10 to 12 inches long, and there have even been reports of them getting 16 inches long. The males being larger than the females. The wild type has a blue to gray base, depending on when you catch them, and they have, you know, a reddish orange polka dots all over them. And even some localities can have black spots instead of the red or orange spots, which is pretty neat looking in itself. These guys have bold, aggressive attitudes, and they can live 15 to 20 years. They're typically a look but no touch species, so it's something that you are gonna wanna build a living work of art out of, a bioactive cage, and then keep your Tokay gecko in there and be able to look at it and admire it. I like to put a wise camera on mine every now and then so I can see what they're doing at night, and they're really fun to watch. They honestly remind me of velociraptors from Jurassic Park sometimes, the way that they hunt and track their prey. It's really neat to watch. If after knowing all of that, you still want a Tokay gecko as a pet, you are going to want to first look at captive bred versus wild caught. Now, captive bred, hands down, is the way to go. Now, captive bred is going to be more expensive, but I, in my opinion, believe it is well worth the extra cost to have that peace of mind and to know you're getting a healthy animal, especially if you're going to breed it, because you don't want to be spreading anything that animal from the wild might have to your other animals in your collection or in your reptile room. So the wild caughts typically don't live as long. They usually come with parasites, and you can't even treat the parasites until they are adapted well enough to where they're not stressed out. So it's a very difficult situation to where you have parasites in this animal, you've stressed them out, which lowers their immune system, and then you can't even treat the parasites because you have to wait for that stress level to kind of come down. So that's another reason why you want to go with captive bred. These wild caughts are a bit of a gamble. Yes, you're going to pay less, but again, it is a gamble. The only time I recommend going wild caught is if you're buying some kind of brand new morph that you want to breed into your stock or into your line of other Tokays, and even then it's going to be a gamble. But that's something where that gamble is going to pay off. Now, if this is just going to be a pet for you, go captive bred. It is better for the animals. It prevents the wild caught from continuing. Once you buy that wild caught animal, the person who's selling that is going to go get another wild caught animal, and it can potentially end that chain of events. So captive bred, in my opinion, hands down. What size enclosure are you going to put them in? My enclosure I got here is a 67 gallon, or it's a 24-inch wide, 18-inch deep, 3-foot tall enclosure, and they seem to do fairly well in that. I'd love to put them in something a little bigger, and eventually I will get them that. So we'll see here in the future. I'd like to go with at least a 2x2x4, but there's also a 4x2x4 that I've had my eyes on that I would like to get for them. For these guys, you could go with PVC or glass enclosures. It really truly doesn't matter that much as long as you keep the conditions right. And we'll talk about that here soon. Anything you get though, you're gonna wanna make sure it is an arboreal enclosure. As we discussed, these are strictly arboreal animals. They do not spend much time on the ground at all. I've never seen mine on the ground. They are either on top of one of their hides, one of their cork logs, inside of the cork logs, or on the walls or glass, or even hanging from the screened lid. They'll hang from that as well. So again, make sure it's an arboreal enclosure if you get one. UVB, vitamin D. Now these guys are nocturnal. You'll hear arguments that they don't need UVB because they are typically out at night, so they're not going to get that UVB anyways. They're hiding during the day when that is, when the sun is out, and they're able to get that. That being said, there's also studies and arguments that if you do provide UVB, you have a better absorption of vitamin D from that, and the animals are typically healthier and can handle more stress. Now mine, I have UVB on them, and I see them basking all the time underneath those lamps. So I'm a believer that they like UVB. So I keep that provided, and I make sure to replace those bulbs at least once a year because they do diminish in the amount of UVB they can put out. So you want to make sure you are replacing those on a yearly basis at least. And you can even go out and get a UVB meter to check how much it's putting off. And there's research out there that'll tell you how much is the minimum you should have before you discard that bulb and put in a new one. So that's an item to think about that you want. They've got all kinds of different UVB fixtures and bulbs. I know there's some recently that have been banned by the government due to energy, but I don't know where that is at the moment, so it's something you're going to want to take a look at. For your temperatures, you're going to want a basking temperature of 90 to 100 degrees. You are going to want a cool zone of 80 to 85 degrees. And then at nighttime, you can go down to as low as 75. Now with mine, I keep heat lamps on the top with that UVB fixture. They're a combined heat UVB fixture. And I leave those on for about 12 hours a day. I got it set up right now to go off at sundown, come on at sun up. And the heat goes off, the UVB goes off. That gives them a day-night cycle. Then it allows those night temperatures to drop. And being at the top of the cage, they're able to self-regulate on whether they want it warmer, cooler. They seem to do very well. I mean, at this point, if they weren't doing well, they wouldn't be breeding and laying eggs. 90 to 100 on that basking spot, 80 to 85 in your cool zone, and then 75 to 80 at night. Humidity should be about 60 to 80%. For me, I have a screened lid, so typically it's very hard to keep humidity that high with a screened lid enclosure. So unless you are controlling humidity in your room, I do not recommend a screened lid. I would go with maybe a PVC enclosure with some ventilation on the sides, but for me it works out well because I keep my room at about 70-75% humidity here, and that helps for the Tokay geckos. Now if you're above that 80% mark or below that 60%, and for a long period of time, you're gonna risk potential health issues that you don't want to have. So for this to help with it, you can add a water dish, and for that they typically don't drink standing water, but you might get them to utilize it if it is in a gecko ledge or gecko bowl. And you need to do misting. Most of the time they're gonna drink when you're misting their cage. They're gonna lick that off the droplets, either that hit them or hit the glass or hit the side of the enclosure, the leaves in the enclosure, whatever it may be. That's typically how they are getting their drinking water. So you're going to want to mist in the morning and then mist again at night. They really like it humid at night. You want to make sure that humidity is at night because again, that's when they're going to be out and about and hunting. So humidity at night is going to be the key. During the day is fine, but you can go drier during the day. Substrate, we've talked about it. They're arboreal. You don't necessarily need it. I've never seen mine on the ground if I didn't have substrate. I don't even know if they know I have substrate in there. So the one con to not having substrate is when they do go to the bathroom, which is gonna happen, the substrate tends to soak it up a little bit better and absorb some of that smell. It can get pretty smelly. I know I saw a recent video for Dakota Blue Exotics where he had for a short time gone with a substrateless enclosure for a cleaning purpose with a drain, and he went away from it because it was just terrible smelling, difficult to clean, and was not a big fan of it. So I know he's gone back to bioactive cages with substrate, which is kind of what we have at the moment. I brought them up in a bioactive with a substrate layer, and they're now in just I'd say a semi-bioactive. I've got some live plants in there. I've got some isopods and springtails, but overall I'd say the majority of the plants in there are artificial. But not to say you can't go artificial, not a bad thing at all whatsoever. Just clean your stuff frequently. Now if you are going to use substrate like I do, what I used was a mixture of reptisoil, like a cocoa core, and sphagnum moss all mixed in together. Get that in real good, and then you put that on the bottom. Give them it doesn't matter how deep. If you're going to do a bioactive, you probably want to go deeper, and you're going to want that drainage later. But again, if you're not, they aren't going to be on the ground. You want to just to absorb the waste that they are dropping. Decorating. This may be the most important part. Well, besides temperature and humidity, I'd say. But you're going to want hides. These guys, again, are arboreal. They really like cork bark tubes. So I recommend getting those, hanging them if you can, if you've got a taller enclosure. I've got one hung on each side of the enclosure along with them kind of set all around the bottom of the cage, so if they want to pick and choose. And this is where they ended up laying their eggs for me. You want to get them plenty of foliage. I've done that in the way of plastic vines all over, strung all over the enclosure so that they can feel safe and hide, much like you would with a snake or a ball python or any other reptile. They're very seclusive animals, especially these tokays, so you're going to want to give them places to feel like they are hidden so they can exist out in the open but still be hidden. Other things you're going to want are branches, maybe some magnetic ledges, some vines, anything you can add in there that's going to make it look good to you so you like to look at it and that it serves a purpose for the gecko. For feeding, you're going to want to feed juveniles, your babies, once a day, and you're going to want to feed your adults 2 times a week. I feed these guys on Tuesday and Friday. I feed them as many bugs as they can eat in a 5-minute period is typically the amount you want to give them. You don't want to have food available all the time. They are kind of opportunistic hunters in the wild, so it's going to be, and the Mr. System's going off for the others there. Sorry about the noise. But yeah, twice a week, 5 minutes, as much as they can eat in that amount of time, and then remove the bugs from the enclosure. 1 of the 2 times each week I feed, I do dust them with a Repashy. Once a week when I feed them, I am dusting with a Repashy Calcium Plus. You can see here, great product. Not sponsored by them, but seems to do well. It's a very light dusting, as if you're sprinkling salt on your own food. You don't want this caking on them. It's going to kill your insects, and there's a potential your gecko just isn't going to like it, and he won't eat it. He or she won't eat it. Now, what you can feed. I feed primarily dubia roaches with some hornworms mixed in here and there, and then no more than twice a month I'm feeding them a pinky mouse. Usually I'll frozen thawed pinky mouse, and I'll give them to them as a treat. But a varied diet is very good for them. It's how they get all their vitamins, minerals, everything they need to survive and have a healthy, balanced diet. Some other things you can feed them are the discoid roaches, red runner roaches, I mentioned hornworms, silkworms, locusts, crickets. I've fed mealworms, superworms as well, so you can kind of mix and match in there. Regardless of what you're feeding, 1 time a week, I would give that calcium dusting. Now, we discussed it a little, but when it comes to handling these animals, they are more of a look, no touch species. I have not handled mine once. Even when I've transported them from cage to do cleaning or transported them from one cage to another when rehoming, I typically grab the cork tube they're in, I'll put that into a shoebox container and set it aside until I'm ready to move them into the new enclosure. It's not to say that it can't be handled. I know Nerd's got some videos out there that show how to handle them. Reptiliatus has some videos out there that show how to handle these animals, but they do have a nasty bite. As I said, they're aggressive. If they're paired together, they seem to be more aggressive. So if it's breeding season, and it's something where you're gonna have to put in some time and really gain that animal's trust. Typically, you're gonna start by feeding with tongs and eventually graduate that to maybe having them jump onto your hand, eat a bug, and then they're gonna jump back off into their enclosure. But otherwise, if you're fine with just, you know, a beautiful animal that you never hold, never really pet, these guys are great for you. They don't want it. Now, when it comes to breeding, as I said, these guys are great. They have parental care of their child, their hatchlings. It's pretty cool to watch. Typically, the first meal is kind of gross. They're going to eat the droppings of the parents to kind of get their stomach going for that first meal. But other than that, they'll carry the babies on their back when they run around. They will feed the babies, they take care of them. It's pretty neat to watch. You can see that on Reptiliatus channel, and I'm hoping we have some babies here soon that we can start showing some videos like that here. If you do want to see those videos in the future and you do like what we got here going on, please like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and you will get updates when we do post new videos. Now, they reach maturity for breeding around 2 to 3 years of age, and you're gonna want to make sure they have a healthy body structure. So about 90 grams is the kind of the mark where you want to be if you're gonna pair them together, to make sure they got enough fat stores built up to go through a breeding season and be able to, especially your females, to have, I mean, it takes a lot out of them to make eggs inside their body, especially a lot of calcium. So with Delta, I tend to maybe dust twice a week, every other week with her, especially after she's laid eggs or getting close to laying eggs, because I know it's going to be a big draw on the calcium she has in her body. Before you pair your geckos, one of the most important things is to make sure you have an accurately sexed pair of geckos. That you know your male is a male and your female is a female. If you put two males together, it's probably not going to end well. They will fight. They will do damage. As I said before, they have very sharp teeth. They have a pretty strong bite force. And they're aggressive. They will fight with each other. Two females, I don't believe you'd have as much trouble, but you never know. Now to tell this, it can be difficult. Both males and females both have femoral pores. The males will have rough, like when you're rubbing your hands over them, they'll be rough. Males will feel waxy. It's like a waxy feel. Your females will be more well defined. The pores will be more well defined. And when you rub over them, they'll be smooth. Now, the other thing is, if they are fully grown, another way to tell is your male is going to be bigger. It's going to be longer. The males typically have like a larger, bulkier head than the females do. You have a male, you have a female, you've made sure you put them together. You're going to want to make sure they're compatible. You're going to make sure they've taken to each other, essentially. Sometimes they don't. And if they reject the partner, it could end poorly, especially with that male being bigger than the female. One way to tell whether they have is if they're sleeping together in the same cork tube or the same hide. Typically means they're fine being next to each other. So that's something we look out for with Delta, Charlie. Now when it comes to breeding, you've paired, your geckos have mated, they will start laying 2 hard eggs at a time, or the female will start laying 2 hard eggs at a time. And they'll look like little white blobs, and they'll typically be stuck to the wall in the enclosure or the wall inside of a cork tube or a hide you have. Ours, they laid in a cork tube on the side of it. So for this, they'll typically continue to lay 2 eggs every month, and they can lay up to 20 eggs in a breeding season. That's not to say you want to allow them. As we talked about before, it takes a toll on the female's body to create these eggs and lay them. So it may be a good idea to separate your geckos after they've laid their 4th pair of eggs. So 8 eggs, and it may be good to separate them. Go separate ways, call it a year, because you don't want to overexert that female and end up, killing her because she is overdoing it when it comes to creating eggs, laying eggs, breeding. It takes a toll on their body. So look out for your animals when you are pairing them. Now the eggs, when they are laid, you should not remove them. We leave them alone in the enclosure. They are going to lay them in a spot where they know they're safe, they know the conditions are good, the humidity's right, the heat is right. There's a very wide range from what I've seen that you can hatch these eggs out or incubate them, even though you're not putting them in an incubator. You're going to leave them in the enclosure. They will hatch anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, depending on your temperature typically in the enclosure. So if your humidity's right, your geckos should put these eggs where they want the temperature to be and in the enclosure, and the rest you just kind of leave them alone and let them do the rest. They will guard their eggs and their nest ferociously. So when you go in for cleanings or you go in to check on the eggs, be careful. They're, as I said, they're great parents when it comes to the animal world or the reptile world, so they will protect their eggs. So be careful when you are going in there. Now when it comes to breeding, you're gonna have to look it up. There's a handful of morphs out there for Tokay geckos. The blue powder, the granite ones are my favorite. The red ones, they got hypo, albino. From one looking, there's probably at least 15 to 20 morphs out there that you can breed for. Now, that being said, Tokay geckos will look wildly different from different localities. We talked earlier about the red spots versus the black spots. That's not necessarily a morph. That's potentially a locality difference. And they will fire up and fire down depending on their mood and their environment, so that they can potentially blend in with their environment a little better. I know with mine, if they are stressed or they're afraid, they'll be real bright when I walk in the room, and as I get closer to the cage and they want to kind of scurry off and hide, they'll get much darker and deeper colors. So trying to blend in with their environment, I'd assume, but they call this firing up and firing down, I guess. So that's something to look out for. If you see your animal changing colors, it may not be anything to be alarmed, but it's not another morph necessarily. So if you are going to go out there, buy morphs, again, try and get captive bred. Unless it's a brand new thing, then you're going to probably have to get wild caught. And again, take extra precautions with the wild caught. Quarantine, take them to a vet, get them treated. It's going to be potentially more money in the long run, but if you're going to mix these in for breeding purposes, you don't want to get your other animals sick or get them infected with anything. I hope this was helpful. Again, if it was, you want more like this, please like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments down below if there's any videos you want to see. Is there any animal out there that you'd love to see a care guide on? Throw it down in the comments. We'll try to do the best we can to put one out there, especially if it's something we're breeding here. It makes it that much easier because I have some observations of my own from keeping them. But other than that, thanks again for watching, and we will see you guys on the next one. Bye.